fostering deeper relationships, influencing behavior change, developing resilience. You're about to start winning. Here is your host, Christine Bright.
Welcome to Parenting Game. We are in episode 3 on our topic of autism. And today I'm especially excited about this. We are going to talk about how we as individuals and as a community can show up and support those who have autism. Again, my guests are Barb Schlaefer, who's been walking the journey of autism with her son, and I have Brenda Vysen, who is Director of School Services at Common Threads. All right, I'm excited about this one, ladies. I hope we can keep it within our time frame. But we are learning so much as we've been talking about this new information coming out about autism. I think the biggest thing that we're learning is that this isn't that something's wrong with the child. A diagnosis is a helpfulness to them because they are going to learn about themselves and learn that it's a thinking differently type of a thing. It's not something that needs to be fixed, which I believe is helpful for anybody to know, for the child to know. We've also been talking about how because we have now adults who have realized that they've had autism and are coming back and sharing their stories, that has just been a wealth of information to help decide what services to offer, what works, what doesn't work. I think the biggest piece is the emotional piece. They share that how they felt growing up. I think we touched on that they felt like they were a bad kid, that they weren't smart, and that emotional piece is this feeds into everything else that's going on with the child who's on the spectrum. So today we want to talk about how as a community we can support a family, a parent who may have a child on a spectrum, how we can support a child on the spectrum that, because that's going to be different for us parents who have neurotypical kids. But it is so important for us who have had neurotypical kids to be able to model inclusion, because this is what this is all about. It's like we all think differently. There's a lot of different people. How can we, who aren't, dealing with that, for one, support a parent? How can we model this for our kids to understand that there's not something wrong here, it's this that they're thinking differently and we may have to do things a little bit differently. So I'm just so excited, and I know Barb, you're going to have a lot to speak into this. You're going to have a lot to share on how services and schools have been changing, to make this happen. So what we talk about today, we've kind of defined autism in some of the other episodes, but I would like you to go ahead and again share that. Trying to define it in 15 words or less. Define what the autism is.
Okay. So I'm going to do it in 2 different ways. I'm going to do it by the DSM and how a child gets diagnosed and what that label represents. And then I'm going to define it from what I've heard from adult autistics and what they describe. So the DSM defines autism as a developmental disorder that affects the areas of sensory processing, communication, social skills, cognitive differences, and restricted patterns and behaviors. Not talking with, but listening to the experts, those with autism that have lived through it. There are 3 basic differences that people in autism share. There are differences among those 3, depending on people's experiences, but they see autism neurology impacting the sensory processing, so how they take in information through their senses is different. The way that they handle the information that's brought in is different, and their style of thinking is different.
And them learning that about themselves. We talked about this too, about how we thought that autism was linear, You know, you have low functioning and high functioning. But we're finding out it depends on the situation, on how well they're going to function, and then you can provide skills. So for them to be able to articulate that, learn that about themselves, then they can learn skills and strategies to help them become more functioning, you know, more of the time. And, you know, I love Dr. Green. I'm big fan of his. And, you know, he introduced to me the whole idea of the problem solving piece. You know, we talked about this in one of the episodes of ask the child, you know, what's going on and what they need instead of us guessing, you know, and escalating. And the other part that's interesting too that I thought really made me understand better is kids are limited on what they can use to help comfort themselves when they're in a dysregulated state. And, you know, he says, what do we do sometimes when we're stressed out? We might smoke a cigarette. We might go grab a cocktail, you know, and those aren't available to kids.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Not coming through.
Yeah. No, you know, they don't have those outlets that we've normalized, you know, as adults. They have their emotions. That's kind of the only trick in their bag. And so we got to understand that, like, oh, something's there's a problem here and we need to solve it, and that's why we're having all this emotionless. And then us as adults too have those times when we have these expectations and we get emotional.
Right.
The show sometimes can cause me to be a little emotional with that. So, you know, with all those different pieces, and, you know, as we're looking at that, as, you know, as far as supports, I want to get more into the piece of, you know, community. And, you know, Barb, I want to bring you into this. You know, as a parent who, you know, this was probably, 10 years ago when you got the diagnosis and really started learning. But by then, you know, you had some, you know, other parents in the school putting some pretty harsh judgment on you and your family and what that did. Then, you know, as you got the diagnosis and started growing, speak to us parents who have neurotypical kids. What was just so important and helpful and kind that we can do for a parent, you know, when we know that their child, you know, is on a spectrum?
Yeah. I would say, number one, give us the benefit of the doubt. Start there. You nailed it when you started talking about the parents being the ones to model inclusion. What I noticed is that many times in the classroom or in the children, really, the neurotypical kids, were actually quite kind and accepting of their of my son and other kids on the spectrum. But as they grew and the birthday party invitations didn't come, it was the parents, I think, then didn't necessarily, you know, the child would come home and say, Matthew had threw a pencil in school, or Matthew threw a chair today, you know, and then the parents start thinking, oh, that's a bad kid. That's a bad kid, and maybe we don't want to invite him to the birthday party. So I would give me the benefit of the doubt. I know it's hard, but reach out. Talk to me when I come to the concert. Get to know me first before passing judgment on my parenting and on my family situation. The strange thing is that I had two other neurotypical children, and people knew me as their parents too. But for some reason, I honestly felt very lonely. Very lonely sometimes, not being included. And so, if you could just reach out to those parents and get to know them. Get to know their kids. They will. I was willing to share with anyone who's willing to listen.
Well, and two, as parents, are we not always comparing ourselves to somebody else? And I know I'm just going to own it. And that came into play. It's like, oh, well, at least my kid's not that kid.
Exactly.
I mean, that
exactly.
we as parents have to own that we are always, comparing and contrasting, and that is really, really harmful. I recommend to all my parents to read Brene Brown, her Daring Greatly, and she touches on in parenting there and how that is, we do, and we really have to be, aware. I mean, I look back, with my son too, and there were some cases of that where, what would have happened if maybe instead of just doing that passing judgment, this is obviously a bad kid, I don't want my kid there. I don't know what else would have been going on. I mean, maybe I could have offered support to that parent, and then that child could have seen a different atmosphere, with my son. But I think the biggest thing is as I see that, I just grieve for the parents, because when you have a child that's exhibiting behaviors, nobody's taking the time to talk to you to figure out why. That is, very, very isolating.
It is,
and it's that just ends up bleeding with the whole family, because now the parent is not only working really hard to provide resources and everything. Now I'm feeling judged, and my kid's isolated, and I'm isolated, and that's just not good for the mental health piece. In that,
and if I could just add to what really helped me was connecting with other parents of autistics, because there's nothing like talking to a parent who really understands, what a meltdown is, what it's like sometimes to spend your whole day walking around on eggshells, not knowing what's going to happen next. And so when I found my peeps and we could go for coffee and talk, I didn't feel isolated anymore. I still would have liked to have neurotypical parents as friends, but I would say try to find those, try to find your peeps if you can. And there are ways to do it. Facebook now, you can just type in anything, and I belong to a group of parents on Facebook, and you can find them. Maybe they're not in your school district, but they're out there and they understand.
And get that support. I see you shaking your head, so I know you want to speak into this.
I do. One thing that I want everyone to understand, parents of autistics and parents of neurotypicals, is that an autistic child's behavior is not a behavior in a way that we typically look at. They're not trying to get something. They're not trying to manipulate. They're not spoiled, I guess, right?
Or just being defiant.
Right. Their behaviors and their meltdowns are due to their sense of safety and how much that they have taken on in their neurological pathway. So if we're all feeling safe, we're on this green pathway in which we can engage and be calm and happy. However, if we feel unsafe, our brain is just wired to take two different pathways. One is a red pathway, which is the fight or flight response, and that's what you often see with those meltdowns, is the child's not feeling safe and my body's just taking over and this is what it needs to do. The other pathway is shutdown, which is also something you don't want to see, where they just withdraw from everything. So when you see those big behaviors from children with autism, no, one, they're not intentional. The child is not deciding to act like that. Two,
they're not trying to manipulate.
They're not trying to manipulate. It's not what they want to be doing. It's just their brain's response to the moment.
I love that you said that. Thank you so much. That's what I want other parents to understand, and teachers, that my child's not trying to get out of class or get out of something. It's the body is reacting.
Well, and I hear that a lot with the kids that I work with, and you're talking to teachers, and I'm just like, just want to, say something. It's, because it's always this constant, they're trying to get out of work, or, so we really need them to do this and, and work through this, and that, again, it's great. And there is research out there. It's new about the vagal nerve, where they speak to, you do not have control over when your body is taking in sensory and it's not safe. One of those three things are going to happen, and your body decides it for you. It's super, super fascinating. And, so that's great. So more information is, coming out about that. And that, I think the other piece is too, I just remember with Matthew, there was this time and he was just crying and he goes, I don't want to be this way, after, an episode.
Yeah.
And it was so heartbreaking. They know, and I think sometimes too, we think as parents that maybe it's satisfying to them, or looking on, it's just like, when you have this idea that that's something they want to do, right? Because they're trying to get out of work or whatever, that's satisfying to them, and that is not the case, and they don't like how they feel once they're calm and can process all that. They don't like how they've acted out. They want to try to do better.
Right.
And that is, I love that. I'm going to use that.
And I think how you respond to it impacts the self-esteem, like we were talking about last time, right?
Yes.
Unless you process it and let them know that it wasn't their fault, right? They didn't have control over that. They're just going to feel worse about themselves, like, I always do that. I don't like that I do that.
Yes.
But I'm just
And
bad. I don't know any better.
And was that, for you, because, I think, I work with a lot of parents, right? And we look at undesirable behavior, which is a meltdown or saying no. And we think of it as defiance, right? I told you to do something, you're not doing it, and you're having this meltdown, so it's defiance, and we go into this punishment, type mode. Instead of taking a moment and saying, not that kids don't dig their heels in and defy. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I would say the majority of the time, there's a problem in their head that needs to be, solved, and that, and that's why they're doing that. But it's sometimes a hard page for parents to turn to think of that way. Now with Matthew and as you learned more about with him, was that helpful for you? Did you kind of always know that about the meltdowns, or was that an education piece for you to really understand why he was having these meltdowns?
Yeah, absolutely education piece. Absolutely. I learned a lot from working with the mental health counselors at Common Threads, and I had to, I wasn't perfect. I didn't wake up or have this child and know intuitively, because right, as parents, like we sometimes just parent the way we were raised, right? And so we don't usually have all the tools to be like, stop, think. And also, it can be very emotional for the parent to be in the moment of a child who is dysregulated and upset, and sometimes it's upsetting to us. And then, now we have to control our emotions. That takes practice. So yes, no, I didn't. I learned along the way of practice, and with the professional help as well. So I'm still learning.
Yeah. So what do you see, like when you have parents come in, and they're more of, on the beginning stages of this journey, they got the diagnosis and understanding. What have you seen for parents that has been really helpful to them to understand, about the meltdowns, like,
Sure.
what you said, but again, it's undesirable behavior, typically as a parent's like, well, I don't want to see it again, right, so what encouragement and support do you give to parents, because we know it's going to happen again. Now the goal is for them to learn skills and it happen less and less, but what are some helpful things for parents when the meltdown happens, you're emotional, they're emotional? What skills have you shared with them to navigate that?
So parents that we interact with at the school have come from a long history of their student failing in school, and the look of it as behaviors versus what it is. So I think just sharing with them how we view them and what can happen with behaviors. Sometimes out of those blue behaviors, we talk about they have a balloon and it just gets full as they experience, right? Sensory expectations, communication expectations, task demands, and it just gets bigger. And sometimes it's just that last task that's put on there that pops the balloon and it's a meltdown. So I think, first of all, parents feel relieved. I think they start to feel like it's not my fault. It wasn't my parenting. I'm not doing anything wrong, right? But I want to know what to do to help.
And support.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. And then what are, some of those tools? So, I'm sure we're going to have some parents watching who are on the beginning of this journey or just discovering this. Is there, just a couple simple things that they can do? Because, we know the meltdown piece is probably the most traumatic for child, for parent, and, and navigating that. Is there just some helpful pieces like, okay, we're in the midst, we got a meltdown. How can I get things kind of calm down and back on an even keel? Is there some good suggestions for that?
Sure. So what we use at Common Threads is a 5-point scale, which basically mimics a child's crisis cycle. So when they're calm and regulated, they're at a 1. As they start to go up, it goes 2, 3, 4, 5 is the meltdown. So parents know their child very well. They probably know the behavior right before it's going to happen, but they haven't necessarily put it into that kind of format to really understand the behaviors and know that when I see this at number 2 is really the time to respond. If he's at a 4 and I'm trying to respond, he's just going to go to a 5 because any more input or any more interaction is just going to increase it. So really looking at your child's cues and knowing the first signs of dysregulation would be what I would recommend.
Okay.
At that point, I would engage with your child with something that they enjoy. It could be a sensory activity like taking a walk or swinging. It could be their interests such as Pokemon or trains, but just really engaging them so that their body and neurology can come back down to a 1.
Okay. That is a very, very helpful tool, for keeping those things, handy. And even with neurotypical kids, right? Because every kid gets overwhelmed emotionally, output, and now, we're having, meltdowns. So, with one family, it's puzzles. We always have a puzzle going somewhere. So it's like, you know what, maybe it would be helpful if you go start, working on the puzzle. Or, let's get out the Magnetiles, which is a new toy that I think is absolutely fabulous. The fun stuff that you can build with these Magnetiles is awesome. And having that out, that's just a good parenting strategy, to begin with. But I also, feel too that sometimes with parents, it's like it's coming and you get caught up in your own, like, it's coming, I don't want to really deal with it, I don't know what to do. And that planning piece, having that, a plan is so important because then it's not like every time there's an episode you're trying to figure out what to do. We know some things that work, so this is what we're going to go do. So an excellent piece on that.
Yeah, I want to add that the rumors about autism is that they don't really like interactions, they're not social children. That is absolutely not true. They crave those interactions, they want those social opportunities. So if you try something like having them do Magnetiles and they're doing it on their own but it's not helping, join them. Some kids really need that co-regulation and need to be with someone who cares about them and can help regulate. So just to put that in there as well.
Okay, that is awesome. So as we talk more about community, okay, so we've talked about how another parent can support, a parent. What's kind of some helpful things like in a community that, a community can do, or that you've seen the community now kind of stepping up to, to prepare or to know that, there's autistics in the world, how can we support and make things better? What have you seen, or what's kind of coming on the cutting edge, so to speak?
I think visuals really help an autistic make sense of the world. I want to share some specific information that I learned from an autistic who really found his community, his people in cosplay
Okay.
and
right.
anime
Yeah.
and that kind of world. And going to an anime conference, he said, was really freeing because they write down all the expectations of what you can do and what you can't do, and knowing that made them feel ready to go into that and be their best selves. So I think as much as we can give expectations to people, let them know what's expected when they're invited to a meeting or when they're invited to a birthday party, and how that will go, I think that would go a long ways.
I think so too. Well, even just in general, as people, don't we like to know,
Yes.
you know, what's going on and what's going to be next? Because, you know, again, inclusion is so important. And I think the biggest piece is because of how those people on the spectrum think, I think there's things that we have as far as technology is because of how they think, that they're able to, you know, do some of this other intricate thinking that I know. I mean, as I said, I'm still having trouble with Instagram. So, you know, and this one boy I'm working with, I mean, I know if I gave it to him, he'd like figure it all out for me. But then I also know that's what we would be doing our whole time together, is he'd be running my Instagram. So I haven't let him have control of that yet. So what are you seeing too as, you know, all autistics are different. They all have different capabilities, likes and dislikes. But because we have these three kind of general areas of how they think, are you seeing different types of schooling? Are you seeing different types of like jobs that tend to be a little bit more typical and satisfying to them, that they're drawn to?
So I think it all comes down to they're still individuals. I see a lot of autistic, the autistic adults that I see seem to be drawn towards sociology or psychology, computers, IT, and a lot into the field of autism. They really want to contribute to how they're seen and how they're treated and what's happening for them.
Yeah, I mean, and I've, you know, been reading, you know, just a lot more, and I've, you know, come across some great articles. And the one thing that I like is, you know, their honesty in their writing. It kind of cracks me up, you know. But they talk about like, you need to teach us this because, as I think the one line the guy said is like, this will save our bacon as we get older, you know. So we're capable of learning. We're capable of learning skills. You know, here's some important ones to do that. And I think that is such a great vulnerability that they're willing, you know, to have, is, you know, to share all those, you know, pieces. What are you seeing in the community, Barb? Because as I said, you were, you know, like 10 years ago, you've been walking this journey. A lot has changed. What have you seen for the better that has changed and been beneficial to you and your son? And
yeah, I think there's an expansion of knowledge. It used to be, you know, 10 years ago, when people think about autism, they think Rain Man, you know, that movie.
Oh, yes.
Or they think, oh, because you're autistic, you can do incredible math in your head or whatever. But I think there is a more understanding of a more global look at autism and more of an acceptance. Like 1 out of 69 people have autism. And so I think there's also more an embracing going on. People who actually are adults now who maybe never were diagnosed and like, hey, maybe I'm autistic, you know?
Yeah.
And that's being okay. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And almost like, you know, embracing it and celebrating it. I just want to run back on something quick.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got time. So we had talked about parents, and I just want to say something a little bit more about support for parents. We talk a lot about supporting your autistic child, and that you also, I know you're so tired and you spend so much time with, you know, navigating everything for your autistic child, but you do need to take time for your other neurotypical kids.
Oh, yes.
Because they are affected so much by the fact that there's a special needs child in, and it's so easy to be like, this child needs all this help.
Yes.
So it's so important to keep those relationships with your other children and do special things with them. I used to do like a one-on-one special weekend with one of my sons, and nobody else, just the two of us. And then also, you know, your relationships with your significant other is so important, because it's so easy to let all of this kind of like take over your life.
Yes, you got to
Need
stay
it, and
healthy.
make time for yourself
Yeah.
after all of that.
To be able,
and
it's
be
easy
kind.
to-
Be
to
kind to
sacrifice.
yourself. We don't all wake up knowing what to do.
Oh my gosh, ladies, we could probably do another episode on this. We may have to revisit this down the line. I appreciate for all the input and information. Parents, I thank you for tuning in. And as always, remember, investing in a child is never wasted time.
Thank you for watching The Parenting Game. All episodes of The Parenting Game are available on demand at sunprairiemediacenter.com.